This is TWiT.
We want to hear a little bit about the great challenge that has just completed, and that's the National Science Foundation's Wireless Innovation Challenge. Now, this is where Mozilla and National Science Foundation actually created some challenges that looked for innovative ways for wireless technologies to connect people over the internet to each other. Now, there were a couple of challenges here. There were the Off-Grid Internet Challenge and the Smart Community Network Challenge. Now, Heather, you're quite involved with this challenge, right?
Yes, I was lucky enough to be one of the judges, so I've been involved for almost a year now. And we winnowed the applicants out of the two challenges. We winnowed it down last December from more than 100 to I think about 20 per challenge. I will say that as difficult as some of the news is over the last year and a half, 2 years, has been going through the applicants here and then in the process of meeting the finalists this last week has been faith in humanity reaffirming. And it was my fervent hope that at least some of them would meet each other for coffee and maybe go off and have really smart babies, because the solutions that got sent to us were it was truly difficult to winnow some those guys down, and it's been a great experience. I would also like to add that the other judges, and if you go to their website, and you can see the list of all of the other judges, PhD fellows at the Ford Foundation, guys that are at the top of their fields across all kinds of rural and broadband equity challenges. It's absolutely a challenge to your own self-esteem being in a room surrounded by all of those guys.
Right. So can you go into have you go to a little of some of the submissions for some of the challenges? Do you remember some of them?
Yeah, so I can speak in general about them. The winners have been basically decided. There's going to be some vetting from the Mozilla Foundation and the National Science Foundation, and they'll be publicly announced later in September. And of course, both the challenges were intensely interesting to me. The challenge one, which was the off-the-grid challenge, is to solve the problem of how you can reconnect a community after a natural disaster. So how you can get vital comms reestablished. And I do a lot of volunteer work. I know that they've talked about it on TWiT before with ITDRC. And so this was a challenge that was near and dear to my heart. Those solutions that were proposed, everything from software-defined radios to LTE alternatives, of course, mesh, and then some other interesting things that were little handheld radios that were in 3D printed cases. So there were some real interesting thought that went into that. The challenge too, it was just so hard to pick which one I would have been wanted to concentrate on more, because this one is trying to solve the problem of broadband equity. And there are places, as hard as it is to believe, I'm sitting just north of Silicon Valley. There are places all across the United States still where 70% of the population has no access to broadband. I can tell you that I currently live in deep East Texas, and in a 3-county area, there is no fiber that does not involve oatmeal. And so solving our connectivity problem is absolutely near and dear to my heart. I have jury-rigged the heck out of that little log cabin, and it's still debatable whether that's going to be enough to allow me to be a co-host going forward with this. And that's I've got 3 different kinds of I have basically every single possibility of connectivity that's out there. And so the challenge, the guys that were rising to this, it was really interesting. We had about 50% of the guys were solving rural problems, and the other one, and this shocked me, and this was a little something that I could have, I really wouldn't have thought about. The urban areas is actually going to be a harder problem to solve than the rural connectivity. And I would have thought that it would have been the other way around. So watch this space, and we'll talk more about this once the winners are announced. There's a significant amount of money. That I think already $300,000 went out in round one. The top winners of each category are going to walk away with $400,000 to invest and to take their prototypes and make them reality. And there's a strong hope amongst the judges that all of the winners are actually going to be helping solve these really critical problems.
Hey, Heather, I want to jump in here. I've been working with a teeny tiny little company out of, I think, Vancouver called Sonnet, Sonnet. I've met them on Indiegogo, and they're also on Kickstarter. It's a really, really interesting thing because I believe they're part of that wireless challenge for off-grid communications. Right now it's a 3D printed case and uses LoRa for long-range communications. And with an external antenna, they're looking at possibly 23 miles line of sight clear air. And then each one of the little devices becomes a small little Wi-Fi hotspot. And then as long as you have at least one, you can connect one of them to the internet, and then it will serve as a LoRa bridge for the rest of the units. They're going to start shipping, they think, in a couple of months. Was Sonnet one of the groups you were able to look at?
Yes, they actually were one of the finalists that made presentations. A presentation. That's actually why I'm here in town. I didn't get to go home. I came out here for the finals. And so obviously, since they were one of the finalists, I can't comment anymore on that. But the technology, as I understood it, is actually interesting because if you think of a traditional mesh network with Wi-Fi, they're basically an intranet, and then if any single one of their devices gets internet access, it automatically becomes the root and can upload the data from the other mesh downlink connections.
Yeah, kind of fun because when I was doing a DARPA project way back that became Zigbee, mesh was absolutely brand new, and it's really cool to see that there's a lot more mesh coming out and that they've actually become IEEE standards. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that because it's really cool.
Yeah, there was a lot of mesh on both sides. A lot of conversation about mesh, and I'm going to go ahead and say this, even though it's probably politically incorrect. There was a joke amongst the room that the real winner, no matter who won, was Ubiquity, because a lot of the solutions involved off-the-shelf hardware, and it was invariably Ubiquity. So.
Hey, Mo, I've got a question that came in from one of our listeners on a back channel. When you were talking about the people who were competing, did you notice any trends? Were there any trends in the male-female breakdown? Are we seeing more women come in and compete in these things, or are we still unfortunately male-heavy in all of this?
So actually, in the judges' room, there were we were actually even a little top heavy, if you pardon the pun. But amongst the competitors, there were a few women. In fact, some of the people making the presentations that were most technically savvy were women. But no, I mean, it wasn't like, somebody took out a magic wand and everything was made right with the world. And so, no, it was still largely a male-dominated challenge.
Now, you said, obviously, some of the big network companies were there to, obviously, part of some of these packages and some of these entries. Do you feel that there was enough representation of some of the big companies to kind of see some of these groups building things and putting things together that they can hopefully help and assist going forward? Or do you think that there needs to be more representation of some of these big companies to understand how their hardware is being used? Right.
No, this wasn't, and that wasn't an on-purpose thing. Actually, one of the things that the challenge was about was coming up with new and innovative ways to use either new products that they've created or something off the shelf. And so there were of the people who pulled from off the shelf, Ubiquity was a lot of what was used. And part of that has to do with one of the other criteria was we wanted to see that it didn't just solve a problem in this little island, that it was replicatable, so that we could take it from this community and then replicate it. And obviously, if you're using off-the-shelf hardware, you're not having to worry about supply chain problems. That's something that was easier for some of the people to put together. And can I just add that on the bottom I'm seeing the comments from the chat room. I really don't want to hear about how great your connectivity is at y'all's house. But good for you. I'm so glad.
Hey, Mo, since this was run partially by the National Science Foundation, was there any kind of comments from the NSF people on what they were hoping to achieve by basically throwing money at this?
I think that was fairly well defined in the scope of the challenge, and so. Not that it was said specifically to us, but the time was incredibly short. So when I tell you that we saw 14 of the finalists, so there were 7 from each of the 2 challenges, each team had 5 minutes to make a presentation and 4 minutes to answer questions, and they held us to it. So it was, I wouldn't have been on the other side of the table for love nor money. Those guys, they were really under the gun. So we didn't really have a lot of time to interact with the NSF person was there in the room to observe, and there were, of course, a lot of notes taking going on by the Mozilla Foundation people.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious because, my project got funded by DARPA specifically to support the warfighter, but I'm kind of wondering what NSF was doing. So, live and learn.
Well, actually, it was a brainchild between the Mozilla Foundation people and the National Science Foundation. So, I think that there's a realization after between what happened in Texas after Harvey, Puerto Rico, and then we're supporting comms up in NorCal after the fires still, and now we have new fires. There's an understanding that without good communications, you can't solve some of the more immediate problems. And so that challenge, I can't think of a better 2 challenges to communications that would be better than, and they were really very well defined. I think that in the creation of this challenge, there was a lot of work that took place even a year before they even launched the challenges.